Well, hello there, and I bring you greetings from Bethany United Church of Christ in Claremont, North Carolina, where no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Today, we are entering Holy Week as we remember Jesus' triumphant entrance into Jerusalem on this Palm Sunday. Today, we begin a time of remembering a harrowing week that culminates in the grand power of God's love. And so today, as we remember the entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem, I want to share a story. When I was in high school, my school put on the musical Les Miserables. And I had never gone to any of the musicals or plays that my school had done, but that particular year, I really wanted to go, and so my mother, brother, and I, we all went to this musical together. And there was just something about it that just really captivated me. I was enthralled by the music, by the message of it all. So much so that when the movie version came out just a few years after that, I had to go. We had to go see it again. I was so excited. And since then, I've watched the movie version, I don't know how many times. I've listened to the music, again, don't know how many times. And as I've seen it over and over, the story that always captivates me the most is the story of the bishop. Even though his portion is rather short in the grand scheme of the larger tale. If you've never seen it before, let me just paint you a little bit of a picture. Jean Valjean had spent, I think it was 19 years in prison after stealing a loaf of bread to save his sister's son from starvation, which in and of itself, that feels like an injustice. The crime and the punishment don't seem to make sense with one another. And when Jean Valjean is finally released, his life is marked as a felon, and he finds it hard to find his place in society. People reject him because of that. Well, one night he is welcomed into the bishop's house. He's given food. He's given a place to rest. Yet, from his fear, even from his growing sense of desperation of how is he going to survive when no one will give him a chance anymore, as all of that is weighing on him, he arises in the night, he steals the silver that is in the bishop's home, and he flees. Well, when the authorities catch up to him, they bring him back to the bishop, and as I see it, the bishop is given two choices here: might or mercy. Does he utilize the might of the authorities, of the law of the time, and have him thrown back into prison for who knows how long for something like this? Or does he embody the mercy of Christ, of divine love? Does he choose a more compassionate way? Does he use an earthly power that was very much designed for punishment? Or does he use a heavenly power that could transform this man from the inside out? He chose the more compassionate way. He dismisses the authorities. And the bishop simply asks Jean Valjean to take the silver and use it to become an honest man. And that moment, it did change his life forever. If you've never seen it, I won't give any spoilers in that regard. The bishop could have chosen a path of earthly might, of using earthly power to control the situation, to bring about punishment. But instead, he followed where I feel Jesus is leading, to a way of heavenly mercy, to a way of justice. In many ways, the people of Jerusalem are presented with two very similar choices as Jesus is entering the city, as Jesus is entering Jerusalem near the Passover. On one hand, you have the might of the Roman Empire, where the emperor is seen as having divine authority in some way. There's a sense that he is divinely inspired, even some Son of God elements to it, right? And we remember that at this time, Jerusalem is under the occupation of the Romans. And this, of course, led to a lot of tension, particularly at Passover. Because what's remembered at Passover? At Passover, the Jewish people were remembering, the Israelite people were remembering how they escaped Egyptian oppression. And recalling such stories, that might raise animosity toward the oppressing forces of the time. So fearing such remembrance of liberation and fearing that it might cause some rebellious actions against the Roman Empire, this would be the time when the Romans would show their might, would show their force, their power, by sending rulers and soldiers into the city. They would come to be seen so that anyone considering resisting the empire will think twice. The force, the might of the Roman Empire is undoubtedly on full display as the Passover approaches. And that power is there to lord over. So on one hand, you have this ruling authority, this occupying force that claims divine power, mind you, that it enters the city with earthly might as that which leads them. And on the other hand, you have Jesus. You have Jesus who enters in a more humble way, the one we hear about in our gospel lesson this morning. You have Jesus who leads not with earthly might, but with heavenly mercy. From his place of healing and feeding, from his place of providing hope and help, he rides in not on a war horse like the Roman authorities would have, but he rode in on a donkey, a humble creature, the Messiah, the one to save, the one for whom the people who are crying out, Hosanna, God save us. They are proclaiming his divine nature. And he does not come again with that earthly might, but with that heavenly mercy. And yes, some might have expected Jesus to come from royal halls and to be an earthly ruler that wielded that earthly power. We recalled some of those hopes back at Christmas when we remember how Jesus' birth is not the way many might have expected it to happen. In fact, Jesus is born in some ways as far apart from earthly authority as one might be able to get. And throughout his ministry, we see that Jesus reigns and rules, and that his reign and rule does not come from a separate place of ruling over, as the Roman Empire was doing. But his reign, his rule, comes from living among. He does not come from a place of pushing down to maintain control, but he lifts up to bring life. He does not hurt, but he heals. Jesus does not lead by intimidation, but by inspiration. He leads with a law of love, which elevates humans and their worth and their dignity. And it lifts those things over rules and customs and hierarchy. Jesus offers a different way, a compassionate way, a merciful way. And the way that Jesus is offering, it is not an easy one, right? The compassionate and merciful way can be extremely hard. Jesus knows this all too well, right? I mean, look at where it leads. The events of this coming week that lead ultimately to his death. And earthly might, earthly power, that can be so alluring. It can draw you in. For some of those who likely are proclaiming Hosanna today, will be drawn in to the might of the oppressing forces and will proclaim, crucify him on Friday. But just because the way that Jesus offers might be difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't follow where Jesus is leading. After all, the way of Jesus holds its own power. It is an eternal power. Yes, it's the power that we witness, of course, on Easter morning when we realize that heavenly mercy cannot and will not ever be overcome by earthly might. But it's not just witnessed then. The power of Christ and that way of mercy is witnessed when people who are hungry are fed. It is a power that is witnessed when those who have been pushed aside are welcomed in, are embraced, are given hope and help. It is a power that is seen when the chains are thrown off and when the cries of people are heard. It is a power that is seen in every life that is transformed through the mercy of Christ. Might or mercy. That is what is in some ways on full display in our Palm Sunday story. You have the might and the earthly force of the Roman Empire and the mercy of the one who enters on a donkey, who is leading in a different way. You know, as I think of this dichotomy, if you will, of might or mercy, I find myself reflecting on the life of the late Judge Frank Caprio. Maybe that name rings a bell to some of you. But he was a judge in Providence, Rhode Island, and he eventually even had a televised court series called Caught in Providence. And I only became familiar with him through some of the short viral clips of his courtroom that I would see on Facebook and places like that. And for him, as both a judge and a person of faith, he had at his disposal might and mercy. And he could choose the might of the legal system, the mercy of his faith. And it seems that he always led with mercy. He didn't negate or forget this part of his role of what he was tasked with, but he always led with mercy. He would hear people's stories. He would see them as individuals and not just as whatever brought them into the courtroom before him. He showed compassion and kindness. He even, at times, I understand, would help people pay off their fines when the law said, yeah, you did this thing, you need to pay this off. But if they couldn't, he had a fund apparently that he would help use to pay off some of those fines, so that people didn't have that hanging over them, so that they could move forward, so that they could be better. He earned the nickname as the world's nicest judge. That was actually what was on the headlines last year when he passed away. In many ways, I see that he put his faith into action. And though he was in a position of earthly power, right? As a judge, he was in a position of earthly power. He still always led with mercy and sought compassionate justice, even when might was right there for him to use. On his website, it says his courtroom was a place where defendants were treated with dignity and where the deserving were given a break. Not a pass or a get-out-of-jail-free card, but the chance to right their lives and care for their families. In that was mercy. When faced with the opportunity to impose might, he led with mercy. And that is where I see Jesus leading in Palm Sunday. Beloved people of God, in this life, we will be faced with might and mercy, and there will be times when we ourselves have to choose what we will use and which way we will follow. When we are faced with those choices, may we remember the moments that we recall as we begin this Holy Week, as we remember Jesus entering Jerusalem today. May we follow in the ways of Christ's mercy and apply that to our work, to our communities, to our families, to all the aspects of our lives. And yeah, it's not always going to be easy. Sometimes might appears a whole lot easier. But that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. Yes, it is the way Jesus leads. And it is the way that it embodies its own power, right? The power of the way of Christ is one that can transform lives, that can bring forth justice in real and tangible ways, a way that lifts up others with hope. It is through such mercy that we follow Jesus and that we see God. I'm reminded of one other scene in the movie version of Les Mis, and this will be a bit of a spoiler if you've never seen it before. The bishop, whose role is so short but undeniably pivotal through his acts of mercy, this bishop makes one more appearance. And at the end of the film, when Jean Valjean is dying, and as he's entering the afterlife, the bishop portrays the embodiment of God welcoming him home. The mercy that he showed was key to Jean Valjean's transformation and was key to helping him see God. That's the power of mercy. So may the mercy of Jesus rule in our hearts and encourage us to always seek the merciful way. So be it, and may it be so. Amen.